All right, let's do it. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, and thank you very much for listening today. I am going to give you just a very brief update. I got to be honest, it was a draining week. Those of you who listened last week know it was a big shift, and it's been 1 week since I let go of the center and someone else took over the space. And it's been a little bit of a, I would say trying week only because things went so differently than I thought they would, that had been planned. And partly I think the new owner just said some things that I think she knew I wanted to hear, and I think I heard what I wanted to hear because I desperately wanted things to go well for the teachers after I parted. But, I mean, it seems like almost as soon as we signed the documents, it was like a different story. And, she didn't do it gradual, so now there's this big banner out front that says Hot Yoga Studio, which is just confusing, It's confusing. Even if she wanted to do that, even if she wanted to shift over to a completely hot center, a more gradual transition might have been a good idea, because the people who were coming here to do the practice that we were offering were specifically coming here because they didn't want to go to a hot studio. So nobody even feels comfortable sometimes walking in. Now, granted, there's always new people walking in and they don't know nothing from nothing. And the other thing that's very I think, difficult is the way that, yoga center owners decide to throw their weight around, I have always been incredibly hands-off. So once the teacher closes the door, it's like, it's their space. They do with what they want. It's always been a really true independent contractor situation here. They sign their own classes in. They tell me when they need subs. They don't have to get them themselves. They can do what they want when they're teaching in this space. And that would include how they choose to configure the space, which has become this kind of crazy thing where the new owner has decided that she wants the classes to face a different way than we've been facing. There's these windows in the space, and when I walk into the space, it's just a natural impulse that you would want to face those windows and look out and see the ivy out there. And I've never asserted that with the teachers. I've never told them that they have to face this particular direction, but everybody has agreed. It feels like the feng shui of the room is such that you would face that way. Well, the new owner has decided that she wants the classes to face a different way. I suspicion that's because she believes that she can fit more mats in here. Not that that's an issue, but I think that's part of the motivation behind it. But I just think it's been very unsettling to all the teachers to have it be told to them which way they have to have the class face, and it's not up to them. And maybe that's seems like a silly thing, And maybe it's more than that. It's not just that she's making us face the classes in a certain direction. And it's just the whole thing of realizing that this kind of home that we had, this place that we felt licensed to do what we wanted to do as teachers, is no longer there. We don't have that same home. We still have this space. I'm still coming to teach classes here, but it doesn't feel the same. It's amazing how much the people and the relationships and the energy of that happens around a space affects what happens in the space, So in any case, I myself am just trying to stick it out. I do feel compelled to continue to finish the classes that I said I was going to finish here, even though it's at the Hot Center. It's, again, an incredibly strange irony that I will finish out my classes here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, teaching at a hot yoga center. Not that it's hot, not that she has any heating elements in here. I mean, I don't know. It's so wild. I'm not sure why people are so into hot yoga, but I guess a lot of people are into the idea of it being hot and there being some benefit to that. And I know that's debated, but in any case, I'm finishing out my time in Williamsburg teaching at a hot yoga center. And ultimately, I do feel good about that in the sense that the people who've been coming are all just coming around to check in and say goodbye to me or to wish me well. And I appreciate all of you who've been listening to the podcast, who also sent me some emails of the same. I am doing really well. I feel okay. In a strange way, honestly, I said last week that I haven't had a chance to take in the emotional reality, but even as I've been doing that this week and people have been coming and having those hugs and those tears, overall, I'm not feeling that sad about it. I got to admit it. It definitely was time. And while there's this difficulty and it's not going as I would have hoped in the sense, at the same time, we're moving on. We're moving on, my friends. We're moving on. And I think we should move on to today's talk with Noah Mazé. Did not know Noah at all. Frankly, I've known of him for a long time. He was always in my mind like this Anusara guy. We talk all about Anusara, about some early origin stuff, even earlier than other people who've been on the podcast. Very interesting. But really, frankly, he kind of came on my radar again because of this like kerfuffle on Facebook. Sort of a situation arose, a bit of a scandal, and I reached out to him. And ultimately, though, it was really great to have this talk with him. And as it happens very often with the podcast, it's amazing to me how much of a different sense I get from someone when I just sit down and have a talk with them like this, compared to what happens when you're assessing someone on a Facebook feed, you know? Such a different story. So in any case, we'll listen to that today. Before we do, let me mention my stuff. I am going to be in Tokyo, Japan, September 29th through October 9th. I am going to be in Tarrytown, New York, November 5th. I've got a bunch of gigs coming up in the new year. I'll hold off on those and let you know about them soon. Let me also mention that I am going to be teaching regular drop-in group yoga classes in the Lehigh Valley starting next month. I'm going to finish out my classes here in Brooklyn through September 26th. I'm going to take this trip to Japan. When I get back, I am going to be teaching at Easton Yoga in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is my new neighborhood. I'll also be teaching at Yukato Yoga in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So if you're listening and you happen to be in the Lehigh Valley and Brooklyn felt like it was always too far to come say hello now, you can find me in the Lehigh Valley. And that also means that the live stream classes will continue. Those of you who've been doing the live stream classes from here at Brooklyn, they're going to continue next month from the Lehigh Valley. You can find out about all those events, about the live stream and my other online video stuff. You can read the blog that I write or listen to the archives of this podcast. All that stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Maybe you would show some support for the podcast. You could go to iTunes and write a review and give us some stars, or go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation. Thank you very much to all of you who do that. Thank you to those of you who take the time to email me and tell me about your experience of what you're hearing on the podcast and your ideas in response to the podcast. There are many exciting things happening for this podcast. We're going to announce going forward. So in any case, thank you to everybody for listening. And you could go to the website if you want to check stuff out. All right, I think that's good. I think it's time for us to get to our talk today with Noah Mazé. Hey.
Hey, Jay. How are you, man?
Good, man. How are you, Noah? What's going on?
I'm very well, thank you.
Cool.
Just home from a Ireland teaching tour and getting back in the swing of things here.
Cool. Ireland. I've never been there. How's that?
It's fantastic.
Yeah? Have you been there before?
I've been there before, 6.5 years ago to Dublin, but we had our 2-year-old daughter with us at the time, and so, we didn't see a lot of the city, much less the country, but we, got to the zoo. So things that you do with a 2-year-old.
Yeah. So you remember the zoo in Dublin, huh?
I remember the zoo in Dublin. Yeah, we've seen zoos all over the world traveling with our children.
Wow.
But no, this trip, it was just me and, went to the south, went to Waterford, and then drove through Cork and up into the not Northern Ireland, but just the northern part of Western Ireland. So it was lovely.
Nice. Wow. I hope to go there. I hear it's pretty amazing. Like, just the geography of the place is kind of its unique own energy and stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of rolling pasture lands and farms and with all sorts of interesting textures and then the Celtic traditions, I guess, and mythologies, and there's standing stones in a lot of places. We call these fairy circles that are kind of just all over on the landscape that the farmers leave intact because they're these kind of geographically significant kind of portals, kind of gateways between this world and whatever other worlds. So it's really an interesting mix of flavors.
Yes, I used to read this series of books. Oh, I'm not remembering the name. Kingdom of Shiva's Irons. It was these books about a golfer and his mystical journeys in Ireland. I don't know.
Oh,
You're filling me with memories of those books.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those. That sounds great.
Cool. Well, anyway, so you're back though. You're back in Los Angeles.
Yep, back in Los Angeles.
And where do you live in Los Angeles?
We are in Hollywood.
All right. Because
if you're familiar with kind of the West Hollywood area, most people that are a bit familiar know of Runyon Canyon, which is kind of a famous, hiking and dog park in Hollywood. So we're not, we're a few blocks away from there, right at the base of the Hollywood Hills.
Okay, I know exactly where you are. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in Canoga Park, Woodland Hills, and I have a few friends who are still around there. But I remember I learned to drive in Laurel Canyon. So I know the area well. I just my brother's friend, and he took me out. He's like, the way you learn to drive is you have to drive through Laurel Canyon with one hand. That was my driver's test.
That's the initiation. That's funny.
I passed.
Right on. Yeah, we're good. We're glad you passed.
Thanks. Well, cool, man. It's fun to talk to you. One of the things I've been really interested in on the podcast is sort of talking to people who I feel like have kind of rode the wave of the yoga boom. Mm-hmm. And are still kind of holding it down.
Right.
And I don't know you. We have like a couple mutual friends, but we've never met. But I've always known you as a person who is sort of like along that ride in a way with me.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you giving me a bit of your time. Thanks, man.
Of course, man. I appreciate getting to chat with you, and hope that our paths cross in person one day.
Yeah, they might. All right, well, the first thing I noticed when I was getting ready to talk to you is that you had like really early exposure to yoga, like 14 years old.
Yep.
So how did that happen? Your folks were into yoga?
Yeah, so I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and my parents, from before I was born, were interested in meditation and yoga philosophy and really, kind of a broad spectrum of Eastern spirituality. So they kind of already made the shift, as we probably would consider hippies in that kind of 60s and early 70s era of just alternative interests, and they both moved away from their religious upbringing and gravitated to Eastern teachings and spirituality, and they were involved in various yoga meditation oriented communities, more probably what we'd call kind of guru communities, and even cult type of communities.
Like any in particular that we would know of?
Well, Siddha Yoga was where they kind of ended up eventually. So Guru Mai Chidvilasananda, her guru, Baba Muktananda, his guru, Bhagavan Nityananda. And so that was really the tradition that I was reared in, and we went, from my childhood, we would take our family trip, kind of our summer vacation, to the Siddha Yoga ashram in upstate New York. And then that organization's main ashram in India, I went there in India the first time I was 13 or 14 years old, and traveled there with my mother, and we stayed for 5 or 6 weeks. My sister, who was a year ahead of me in school, she had arranged to do a semester of high school via correspondence school kind of thing. So she was in this ashram in India for half of a school year. So I very much grew up in yoga philosophy, in yoga teachers and iconography and symbolism and practices, and so it was kind of a very kind of natural evolution of that when I found myself in a postural yoga kind of asana context.
Well, when you weren't in the ashram with your folks, were you just like in a regular public school?
Yep, regular public school in Boulder.
In Boulder.
Yep.
And so, at any point was there any kind of like? I guess you were in Boulder, so it wasn't that weird. But like, was there other kids in your class who were going away to ashrams?
I don't remember that specifically. I do remember various phases of growing up feeling a little bit resentful that my family was different than that of my close friends. Uh-huh. And I think that kind of natural pushback that occurs against what your parents' thing is, they're like, okay, that's not my thing, that's my parents' thing, or those, all of those yoga statues and those, pictures and paintings of Indian gurus all over the house. My friends would ask me, like, who are those people? Who are those people? I'd say, oh, that's my parents' thing.
Yeah. See, that's kind of why I'm asking, because for me, getting into yoga was like how I got away from my parents' thing. You know what I mean? Like, right. They were not into yoga, but for you kind of grew up in yoga. So was there like a time where you were like not into yoga to like get back at your parents or something?
Well, yeah, I remember like, a few different times like not wanting to go when it came down to like, summer break in school, and, I probably remember being like 12 and not wanting to go, wanting to hang out with my friends, wanting to kind of be quote unquote normal, like whatever that is. But, just do like, the summer things that my friends were doing. Right. And I remember, one summer, even my best friend's mother invited me to stay with them. So like, oh, well, if you don't want to go, or maybe you could stay with us and maybe you don't have to go.
Do you think that she thought it was weird that your parents were taking you to the ashram?
I think she probably did. Yeah. They were a very lovely Hispanic Christian family.
Yeah.
But I never remember, any sort of, her critiquing it or anything like that, but really just being generous and be like, oh, I can stay with my best friend, and right. And how fun would that be? And my parents were like, no, you're coming with us. Yeah. And then, I would get there, and in these Siddha Yoga communities, certainly back in those days, the summertime was the time when a lot of people were there, and there was a lot of programming and a lot of kids, children programming, preteen and then teen programs. And so there was a lot of really kind of age-appropriate, young person's programming. And there were a lot of kids there my age from all over the world. So once I got there, I met people, I had friends, and that was the kind of clincher for me of like, oh, wait, no, I do have a community here. And it's not like I'm with just adults and I'm away from my friends. I was making, really close friendships and having a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Well, I also just think, I went to India once in my life for 3 months, but I was in my early 20s. And it was hugely shaping because I had never really even thought of myself as American so much until I left that trip. I had not traveled to other places in the world. And I just remember being really struck by what it meant to be born in America. And kind of deeply, thrown aback and humbled and like... So to have that happen at an early age, I'm sure was pretty formative.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. And I think I was in 9th grade, so what's that, 14 or 15, when I went to India. And I remember just being amazed at how little it looked like people had from my perspective, but how sweet and happy and generous and genuine they were. And that really opened my eyes to a much bigger world, and that, to live a rich, fulfilling, happy life doesn't mean you've got to have all of the stuff that, I grew up having, or that, kind of middle class exposure in the U.S., would make us think that this stuff equals happiness or this equals a prosperous life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So did you think that you were going to become a yoga teacher at an early age, or did you have like some other idea about what you wanted to be first before you decided to get into yoga?
I certainly didn't have the goal of being a yoga teacher. So I grew up playing soccer was my kind of first sport, and then switched to tennis. Okay. And so, I remember like wanting to be a tennis star. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of realized in my teenage years that like, that wasn't my gift, and I wasn't going to go that far playing tennis.
I see.
and then in junior high school and high school, I became increasingly interested in outdoor recreation, and kind of dropped out of the tennis team and kind of phased out of like organized team sports, and was just hiking and mountain biking, and started rock climbing in high school with my friends. We'd go pretty much every day after school.
Well, when you live in Boulder, it's like you got it, right?
You live in Boulder, you got it. And, the foothills are right there. You can just walk up or ride your bike and kind of head up into the hills and have quite easy access to lots of outdoor recreation activities. And so, there was really kind of the call of the wild, so to speak, or nature that I think really also appealed to me as a spiritual kind of connection, not just a physical pursuit, of being in tune with nature and being in the landscape and fully kind of somatically involved in the activities. Right. And, so I grew up skiing. My family, we'd go cross-country skiing, and then they would put me on the ski bus to Winter Park and Mary Jane, kind of ski program bus. So, I grew up alpine skiing. And then at a certain point in high school, they stopped paying for that, and I wasn't going to pay for lift tickets. And so I switched to backcountry skiing. And so I would, in the winter, I'd be going up with my friends or even by myself and just skiing the backcountry. Cool. And just having kind of long days out in nature and, being physical and feeling super connected, and also feeling like the journey, the expedition, the sense of danger, the sense of like, self-sufficiency that you've got to learn, how to be safe in these environments. And so I kind of switched from like sports into outdoor recreation, and then that all found a nice integration in the yoga studio.
Yeah. So how did it happen? What was that first yoga studio that you landed in? Like, you had done stuff at the ashram, right? You did stuff with
stuff at the ashram, and there was kind of, things here and there for the kids, for me when I was kind of in the kids programming. But there was one summer, and I was probably 14 or 15, and I did part of a silent retreat there. So the better part of 2 weeks, all day long kind of silent retreat, which had any number of activities, any number of kind of, practices, different practices happening throughout the day. And we were getting hatha yoga classes. And, so those I think were my first formal hatha yoga classes. I was 14 or 15. And I liked them, and they were hard, and my hamstrings were tight, and it hurt. But I also got that rich sense of an embodied spirituality, like a physical spirituality that in retrospect I can recognize that my athletic side was, I felt, kind of separate from my spiritual side. Like I had my spiritual practices, and then I also played sports.
Right. So the kind of embodiment of what you have to do when you engage your body with sports, being married with something that was like when you go hiking or something. The hiking and that kind of connection that I think many of us just feel being in nature, but that was happening, not just from being in the mountains. And so I went home from that and was interested in going to yoga classes. And so my mother and I went to the local yoga studio, which was Richard Freeman's studio in Boulder. I've been there, the yoga workshop, right?
Yeah, the yoga workshop, exactly.
Nice.
And we would go usually twice a week to Richard's classes. He used to teach a level 1 on Wednesday afternoon and on Sunday morning.
Wow.
And that was kind of our thing that we did together. And Sunday morning we go to his level 1 class and then have breakfast together and then, go on with the day.
That's awesome. What an awesome place to stumble into to get some yoga, because he's a pretty stellar teacher. I've had the pleasure of practicing and studying with him just a little bit in my years, and he's pretty something. So that's a great place to really get some good instruction to start, right? Yeah,
exactly. And with a great integration of the mindfulness, of the philosophy, of the breath awareness, of the meditative aspects and philosophical aspects that I was quite familiar with already, with the kind of athletic asana, postural side of it. Like, you mean we get to work on handstands and do back bends and learn sun salutations and that this is a spiritual practice? I was like, well, sign me up. How come I didn't know about this before?
Yeah, right. So it got to start to be more fun.
Yeah, it totally got to be fun. Like it was, my athletic side isn't separate from the spiritual practices side of myself. So that there I found that they could all coexist and live together and work together. Mm-hmm. And I remember, trying to explain to my friends in high school, about Surya Namaskar A and Ujjayi Pranayama. I'm like, come on, guys, try this Ujjayi Pranayama. It's amazing. And my friends be like, come on, dude, we're not really that. It's kind of weird. I was like, no, seriously, try to spread your toes. Look how you can get your consciousness down into your feet. And they were into other things.
I see. Well, that's pretty funny. I remember when I first got into stuff too. You're trying to sell everybody you know on it.
Yeah, totally.
It's sort of it's actually the worst way to get anybody into it. Trying to convince somebody of it will almost always kind of push them the other way,
Yeah. But they were we were all kind of interested in a bunch of different just alternative stuff, And
but you know what else is probably funny though? Those guys who gave you a hard time. I bet a bunch of them are doing yoga now.
Oh, totally.
Yeah,
Like,
like eventually your friends see how much it does for you, and then they're like, "Oh, wow, what's he doing?"
yeah, and Boulder has such a large Buddhist community as well. So, several of my close friends through high school were, at least their parents were practicing Buddhists. I don't know if they self-identified as that or not, but, I did fit in that kind of larger stew of Boulder, Colorado, possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think
it wasn't weird to be a hippie kid in Boulder.
No, it wasn't weird. I think I felt a little weird at times, but then kind of going to Boulder High School, it's a big public school. There's just so many students in that high school that you kind of find your tribe, and I was definitely with the kind of alternative kind of stoner, rock climber, mountain biker, kind of spiritual yoga crowd.
Right. Got it. Okay, so what happens after high school? Do you go to college, or what happens for you after those years?
Well, so I wasn't, I didn't like the formalized kind of high school process, and I was actually close to dropping out. My parents looked into the alternative high school in Boulder, but at that point I was not far from finished, and I realized that if I just took, a full load the first semester of my senior year, that I was only 3 credits short of graduating.
Okay.
So I took 7 classes my first semester, and then I could volunteer community service hours to fulfill those last 3 credits. It's 20 hours of community service per high school credit. So I just volunteered at the Humane Society and walked dogs and took care of cats and cleaned out kennels and stuff like that.
I think that's an excellent way to finish off your high school. I think about what I did to get my high school diploma, and I didn't do anything half as constructive as that.
Yeah, and and then I never looked back. I didn't go to my graduation. I didn't go to the dances. I was just so anxious to be done.
Yeah.
But in that first semester of my senior year in health class, we had to do, for part of the credit in health class, some extracurricular health activities. And so I was going to Richard Freeman's yoga classes, and I would have my notebook, my log, and he would sign off on the classes that I took, because that was, counting for credit in my health class.
I love that. I actually have a student do that, where she had some kids who were in this alternative high school, and they could get physical education credit for coming to my class.
Totally.
I assigned it like I was their PE teacher.
Yeah, and I think a lot of schools, that's available, whether it's an alternative school or kind of a mainstream school. But there are those kind of ways to do something interesting outside of school and have that count. So that really worked for me.
All right.
And, long before I was kind of logging hours for Anusara yoga, I was logging hours for high school yoga.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you were doing yoga throughout high school, and Anusara didn't even exist yet.
No.
Yeah.
No, Anusara didn't even exist yet.
Yeah.
And,
so what happens? What happens? Where does your yoga go from there? When do you start to have more into your adulthood yoga?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I went to a small liberal arts college in Arizona called Prescott College, so in Prescott, Arizona. And I was not interested in going to university or going to college. I was already working and saw that I could work, make money, and fund my own outdoor recreation trips. I bought a mountain bike.
What was the work that you were doing?
I was mostly working for my parents. My parents my mother still is, a ceramic artist, a potter.
Oh, okay.
So I was working in their pottery studio after school and in the summers, as well as going up to Montana, where my uncles are woodworkers up in Missoula, Montana, and I would spend part of several summers with them just working and going mountain biking in Montana.
Wow.
So I kind of saw it well, I can work and do what I want to do. Why would I kind of suffer through more formalized education? And
you were ready to get out of high school, so why?
I was ready to get out. And so my mom called because I was so into outdoor recreation, she called the Colorado Outward Bound School office in Denver, and she said, is is there a college or a couple of colleges where you get a lot of your instructors from? And they gave her some recommendations. She wrote off, called to those institutions and got catalogs. And I got the catalog to this school in Arizona, Prescott College, and I was immediately sold on this. It was, all black and white, nature-based photography, and which I was also into. So I was actively pursuing photography. My grandfather was a photographer, and I was in the darkroom all through high school, and that was kind of part of my just outdoor pursuits, was also outdoor photography. And so the beautiful nature-based black and white photography, and then their course descriptions, and particularly their wilderness education, outdoor education program, was just incredible. It's like Ecuadorian volcano climbing expedition and cultural immersion. I was like, go to Ecuador and climb volcanoes for a month and do a language immersion in Spanish. I was like, oh, that sounds like fun.
Nice.
And then, whitewater rafting and riparian ecology through the Grand Canyon.
Whoa.
And then on and on and on and on. Go these are the things I want to be doing.
Right.
I can get credit for this. You've got to be kidding. This is exactly it.
That's your nature. That's your spirituality. It's all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all that. And with small class sizes, of course, and experiential educational model. So I applied to that college. I didn't apply to anywhere else. I wasn't interested in anywhere else. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, I got in because I didn't have a plan B. Mm-hmm. And away I went for 4 years to Prescott College. And 2 of those years, I wasn't even there because I was in the wilderness leadership program, and so I was literally all over North America on expedition half of the time, and then in town the other half of the time. And so, throughout all of those times, my yoga practice was really just for myself. And
did you have a self practice that you did while you were in the forest and stuff?
Yep, totally. I mean, Ashtanga Vinyasa with the set sequences goes well with that. So I would do the primary series.
Yeah.
Or some amended version of the primary series every single day, whether I was in town and at home or I was on trip, on expedition. Yeah. And I would always have, I didn't bring an air mattress with me into the wilderness. I always brought a Z-Rest, which is kind of a certain folding pad, but it doubled really well as a yoga mat. So I would just do yoga wherever I was, and that was one of the things that always really appealed to me about yoga, is that you could do it wherever you were. You could be inside, you could be outside, you could adapt to the climate and the environment, and you didn't need specialized equipment, you didn't need a specialized setting to do it. You had your body, you had your breath, you had gravity, and I certainly felt like I knew what to do.
Well, I think that was also a real advantage, or at least benefit, that I got from having an Ashtanga practice at one point too, where having a set sequence that you learned and felt like you knew how to do it, it kind of enabled me to feel that I could practice on my own if I wanted to. Like you just said, I knew what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I wasn't trying to figure out what I felt like doing, or figure out sequencing. It was no, Surya Namaskar A, Surya Namaskar B, the standing series, the primary series.
Yeah.
And at various point, people would ask me. People would be like, "Oh, wow, you really seem like you know what you're doing. You should teach us." And I would along the way, if people asked, but that wasn't my. Teaching that to other people wasn't my interest. I was really learning to teach people outdoor, wilderness living skills and expedition kind of skills. So fast forward a little bit, I get out of college. Well, okay, actually, during college, the Siddha Yoga tradition that I had grown up going to was at that time doing winter retreats, like Christmas, New Year's retreats in Southern California, in Ontario, Palm Springs, California, for a number of years consecutively. And that was the first time that I met John Friend.
So, at a Siddha Yoga retreat?
at a like a Christmassy Siddha Yoga retreat. John Friend was there, and a bunch of other people were there. Also, Doug Keller was there, and I took John Friend's classes the first time I was 18 or 19, and this would have been 94 or 95. So still pre-Anusara. He was very much an Iyengar teacher, but it was that, his own process of being an Iyengar trained and certified teacher, but then in this kind of guru bhakti Siddha Yoga community that those kind of blended together, and Anusara was born out of that. And so I remember taking the first class or two that I took with John Friend, and truthfully, I didn't like them because it was too slow. Mm-hmm. And I was doing the primary series more or less every day, and was focused and disciplined with that, and had a meditation practice, had a mantra practice, had all the other kind of philosophical and what we might call spiritual aspects to it already for myself. And so, I went to these big John Friend classes in these winter retreats, and it was, he was teaching big room, people that primarily weren't asana people. These were meditation people. And, I was the guy in the room that was like, why are we stopping again? Why is he doing another demo? When am I going to sweat? Like, when are we going to
When do we get to jump to Chaturanga?
Yeah, like, how come we're not just doing Surya Namaskar? Like, that's how we warm up. And I remember thinking, like, I could get a better practice out in the hallway.
Right.
So it kind of didn't really click. It didn't really connect for me, those initial exposures to John Friend, and certainly in that context. Mm-hmm. And then just after finishing college, I went again to India and stayed for 6 months and did a yoga teacher training there. It wasn't called an Anusara training, but it essentially was an Anusara training.
So was it at the city place?
Yeah, at the Siddha Yoga Ashram in Ganeshpuri, India, just north of Mumbai. And
John was teaching the training?
John was not there.
Okay.
But teachers that John had trained, teachers that were also Iyengar certified teachers who had at that point been working with John Friend for many years.
Okay.
And it was called Siddha Yoga Hatha Yoga. But I can kind of see with some certain kind of cultural, ritualistic wrappings notwithstanding, it was just an early form of Anusara yoga.
Very interesting. So that's like where he really got together his thing.
Yeah, that's where he really got together his thing, where that kind of blending of like alignment and, pose knowledge met with, grace, open grace.
Like I always thought of him as like Iyengar, but with tantric philosophy.
Yeah, and that's where he got the tantric philosophy. Was there, and it was tantric philosophy in a Vedantic guru model. Because there were swamis and gurus. So there's this kind of formal class of renunciants that trace their order all the way back to Shankara of Advaita Vedanta.
Uh-huh.
And so they had that kind of Vedantic structure with an infusion of Kashmir Shaivite non-dual philosophy.
Right.
So it was a bit of a mix.
And that's kind of the thread he picked up on when he, I think, went off on his own. That Kashmir Shaivism, when he first came out, that was what he was identifying with, if I remember.
Exactly. So it was, his own experiences in that community that kind of opened him up to what he then called grace, or kind of open to grace. And that's where he met Douglas Brooks and Bill Mahoney and Paul Muller Ortega and other, deeply kind of academically trained, but also practitioner scholars.
Mm. And the training that you did, was that less boring than the initial classes?
Yeah, the training I did was less boring, and the teachers were great. Jimmy and Ruthie Bernardt, who are dear friends of mine. They live in Hawaii now, and it was just like good, strong yoga practices, and then teaching craft, and it wasn't a lot of kind of the big show.
Were they?
What I see now is like John Friend was teaching like 200 people in a big room, and you and I and kind of any of us might feel like we'd need to make similar choices of like, well, you can't just crank people through a bunch of sun salutations. Like, they don't know what they're doing. Chaturanga is hard.
Yeah.
So I kind of look back at that and I go like, oh, I probably now would appreciate the way he was teaching, but at the time it was just, I wasn't a teacher, so I wasn't thinking of it like that. But then fast forward to that time out of college that I went to India, lived there for 6 months, did a teacher training, and then the next time I saw John Friend in that same setting, I was with the teachers, and he was doing teacher practices every day.
Let me ask you one question before we get to that. Like, in the training that you're doing, that was like pre-Anusara, were they teaching like the spirals?
Yep.
They were, because that always to me seemed like one of the signature things. But that was there at that city training. They were teaching the spirals. Yep.
So that was, this was probably 1999, 99, 2000. Might have been the winter of 99, 2000.
But it still wasn't formally called Anusara.
Well, Anusara was born by then, but in the ashram it wasn't called Anusara, but it ostensibly was.
But was he teaching under that name elsewhere?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so he was already teaching what he called Anusara. He'd already made his separation from Iyengar Yoga, and the 5 universal principles of alignment was definitely the methodology of practice and of teaching in this training.
I see. So he just hung on to the city gig even after he did his own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. So he was still involved in that community, as was I, and that was our kind of that's where we intersected.
I see. And those advanced teaching practices as you were already a teacher, right?
Yep, I was already a teacher. So the next time I saw him in one of these Southern California winter retreats, I was working with the teachers. I remember shadowing Doug Keller. He was assisting John's classes, and so I was shadowing, kind of apprenticing with Doug Keller as he's assisting, and then invited to come to the teacher practices where John was putting his mat down and working with the Siddha Yoga Hatha Yoga teachers, which was what I was then qualified to be, as well as Anusara was growing at that point, and Anusara teachers were driving in from LA. So it was the first time I met Anthony Beninati and Sue Elkind and Naeem Jazeni and Ross Rayburn and others. They were kind of coming from LA, not part of the Siddha Yoga community, but part of the Anusara community. So there was this overlap happening. And, we're just throwing down poses, and he was leading practice and teaching us. And I had a very different experience than, him teaching the big room. And I remember the first teacher practice that I was at, I put my mat down quite close to John's, and all I remember him saying to me was, Noah, arm bones back, Noah, shoulders back, Noah, head of the arm bones back. He told me probably 25 times, take your arm bones back, because no one ever taught me that. I was doing a million sun salutations every day, with the chaturanga shoulders that you would expect. And, no one had really taught me the way of doing those poses. And I went away from that first teacher practice thinking like, wow, he's clearly got something that he's teaching, and I'm either going to go back and commit to learning that, or I'm not going to go back. I'm just going to keep doing my own thing, because I don't want to waste his time or further embarrass myself by being the guy in the room that is told 25 times to take his arm bones back.
I got you. Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is like, I felt like it was kind of a pivot point for me. I'm either going to kind of keep doing my own practice and pursuing the Ashtanga series as best I could, or I'm going to see what the big deal is. Like, learn what this guy's got going on, and see, have my experience of that. And that's what I chose. So I'm going to go back the next day and really pay attention and learn, and see what happens from there. And kind of that was my
moment.
shift from being a really focused Ashtanga Vinyasa practitioner to also being a very committed Anusara yoga student and teacher. And for a number of years, I did both and taught both. So there was a good amount of overlap there for me.
Uh-huh.
And then the trend was increasingly to for myself at that time to teach Anusara and not also teach Ashtanga classes on the schedule.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. It seems like, at that time in that shift happening, that there was not like a rift, but there was like to hold both of those communities might have been a challenge, because I know like the Anusara community really had like a kula to it. And I'm wondering, like, was there already like official Anusara certification, and did your city training count towards that, or did you have to go do a bunch more trainings to get like official Anusara certification, or did you get in and get grandfathered in early on, or how did it go for you?
Yeah, I got in and got grandfathered in pretty early on, and my the trainings that I took in the ashrams counted towards Anusara.
Okay.
And at that time, John Friend was spending most of the summers in the New York ashram, and so I was continuing to do my outdoor education. I was working for Outward Bound in Oregon and kind of all up and down the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, leading trips. But I could kind of stack my schedule to be able to take time off where there's time between trips. And so I committed to a period of time, a year and a half it ended up being, of going to the New York ashram for 6 months, then India for another 6 months, and then back to New York for 6 months, specifically because John Friend was spending summers in the New York ashram, and that was, to me, what seemed like a great opportunity to work with him, to learn from him, to practice with him every day, to assist his classes. And so I got kind of 2+ months of immersive training daily with John Friend, in those times, like 2000, 2001. Mm-hmm. Then was teaching full time. So my job, my seva in the ashram was teaching. So it was a great way for me to really immerse myself in the education and practice of teaching, in a community that really supported the whole package, so to speak, the lifestyle of it.
And clearly it was fruitful for you. And I've had other people on the podcast, Amy Ippoliti and some other folks who, talk about that time, and it seemed like it was a pretty kind of exciting time. People were really like going to new places in themselves and discovering new things and having some pretty like powerful yoga experiences. Yeah,
it was an exciting time, and John was always very charismatic, and he was also just a magnet of talent, and just creative people would be drawn to him, and it felt very symbiotic and very dynamic and very creative and just exciting to be a part of. Mm-hmm. And this was, in the early years where John was also actively teaching with Richard Freeman and Rod Stryker and others that, his own peers, that there was kind of a lot of cross-pollination happening. Mm-hmm. And, those times kind of shifted as things do, and Anusara grew. Right. And, he kind of fell away from some of his own.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.